welcome to tonight's The PEPP Story Show live. Tonight I'm going to be talking about PowerPoint and showing you some examples of the way I use PowerPoint. Not perfect. Help you to improve the way you use PowerPoint. So we're using PowerPoint. I know that PowerPoint is one of those topics which sparks so much emotion. There are some who just basically, the moment you say you've got to do a presentation, the first thing I do is open the laptop, start filling up PowerPoint. And essentially, PowerPoint becomes a note system. They make notes in bullet points and single slides and great things, or they'll go to a colleague who's done a similar presentation, grab their PowerPoint presentation, shove it in, and really just try and adjust it and manage it so that it works. Sometimes I've seen people turn up to do a presentation. They haven't even looked through their colleague's presentation. They get halfway through the presentation to the I have no idea what they mean. And that's the sort of thing we have. And I think the other thing that people do so often is talking to the slides, just turning around and instead of facing the audience, they're constantly just looking up at the slides and talking through what's going on there. And sometimes just literally reading off the slides. Well, yeah, might as well just send them a document. It's easier to read from a piece of paper than it is to read from a PowerPoint slide. So there are lots of ways that you can badly misuse PowerPoint, really, really misuse it. And the most important is you shouldn't ever start from PowerPoint. Remember, we're talking here about purpose, experience, passion, performance, and story. Those are the elements. PowerPoint slide isn't in that list. It's part of performance. It's part of the tools that you use to help to convey the message. You might use PowerPoint in order to help with a story. Use PowerPoint. I've seen people, particularly using Zoom, use some really great ideas around PowerPoint that I'm looking at myself, where they literally create a PowerPoint screen that comes up behind them and they're in the midst of it. And you can do that with all sorts of different things here. I've got various different visual aids that I can actually pull in from behind me so that if I want to, I can be there stuck in a prison and trying to deal with so you can create atmosphere using basically slides, and that's essentially what that is. I won't leave us for the rest of the show inside a prison. I will take us back to a lounge view, but you can see that you can play with visuals in all sorts of good ways. So when I talk about PowerPoint, I'm not really just talking about PowerPoint. It might be Keynote, it might be Prezi, it might simply be visuals that you use behind you, just images. Up as your Zoom backdrops. Hope we haven't got a problem there with the. Occasionally, I've noticed that I'm dropping my line, so we'll go with. So here we go. Most important thing to remember: don't start with PowerPoint. Start with your message. That's where you start with any presentation. If you're putting your presentation together, start with your message. What is the message you want to put across? How can you make that come across best? It may be you don't need slides at all. If it's a short presentation, it may be you just use a really good story, open it up well, good structure. I've done quite a few of these. Most of my talks on public speaking don't use any PowerPoint slides at all. I sometimes revert to my good old faithful flip chart. In fact, I've got a green screen behind. There's my flip chart. And very often I stand up and present and use the flip chart as if I'm presenting to an audience as I would in a room, because that is a better audio-visual aid, better visual aid than a PowerPoint presentation, which actually can be quite constraining. It's very difficult sometimes to move out of it. Lots of things that you can do. online that you can't do face to face. I can bring up various different PowerPoints, and I can use a whole variety of tools. I'm not trying to be too clever tonight, so it's going to be very simple. So start with your message, look at opening, body, conclusion, get a good structured message. You can get clever as you become more proficient, but in all honesty, if everybody just did this, good, clear message, opening, body, conclusion, tell lots of stories, hey, wouldn't public speaking be dramatically improved? So what I'm going to do tonight is just to show you some of the slides I use. Some are a little bit more sophisticated, as we'll see. So I'm going to bring up my slides and we'll have a little look at where we are. Let's get rid of that banner. There we are. So that's basically the slide. I tell you what I'm also going to do. I'm going to just remove all the the banners around that, so you can just see the PowerPoint slides as I'm coming up with a little tiny picture of me. I can come in a bit bigger every so often just to remind you I'm still here, but there we go. So this is the PowerPoint slides that we're going to be looking at, and it's very, very simple. This is often a trans and non-binary inclusion presentation. The title varies depending upon what individual client might want, the message that they want to try and get across, message I want to get across. Sometimes this is called Rethinking Sex and Gender. Sometimes it's just called Transgender Awareness. Is awareness about transgender. Sometimes I actually give it a really punchy title, treat everyone with dignity and respect. And we can play with all sorts of titles if we want. Now, let's have a look at what we do. When I start my presentation, I very often start with this statement. Is it a boy or a girl? It's the first thing everybody wants to know, isn't it? The moment we're born, everybody wants to know, is it a boy? In fact, it's got worse than that. There's this new fad, this new idea come up of what are called gender reveal parties. So you have this big party and you have all sorts of clever ways in which you can reveal to the entire family, usually, whether it's a boy or a girl. In this case, it's going to be a balloon that's going to pop and out will come pink confetti or blue confetti for boy or for girl. I mean, we're getting very, very stereotypical. Actual explosions, which have actually caused injury to some of the guests as it explodes to tell us that this is a girl on the way. And of course, what this does then is to lead us to this whole problem of gender stereotyping. By the time a child arrives, the world is completely and totally gendered, and they're thrust into this world of expectation. Now, that's pretty much my opening. When I've started to talk about this. And I will then maybe lead on to a little talk about myself. When I was 6, my parents took me to a child psychiatrist. And I have a story about myself and the first indications that I might not be comfortable in my gender, which were missed. Nobody noticed them. And I then tell a story about school and the problems of bullying. And the idea behind this opening is I want to draw people in to how difficult it is growing. They think, do you know what? Life's not tough enough. I think I'll wear a dress. It's not like that. This is something we fight. It's difficult, and we're struggling with the whole issue of stereotypes. So I'm taking people through that journey, and I'm using slides to help me. So next part, and I'm just going to skip now into a much further. I asked the question, this is really my first point is all about growing up. And second point, we start to try and understand what is sex, what is gender. And one of the things I do here in most, if I've got time, depends on how long the presentation, I will try to get people to go and discuss this. If it's in a live room where people are all sitting together, then I get them in small groups of 3, just next to each other, talk about, what's sex, what's gender, come up with some ideas. If I'm on Zoom, then I can say, right, we're going to go into breakout rooms. We're going to give you 5 minutes, talk about, or 3 minutes, talk about what is sex, what is gender, come back and we'll have some feedback. When people come back, Sex is what you're born with. Gender's what you make of it. Yeah, sex is in the body, gender's in the mind. These are the sorts of things that I tend to get. And that then enables me to bring up a lovely slide that says there is an elephant in the room. When we talk about sex, most people, when they're having a conversation about sex, are actually talking about sexual activity, having sex, doing it, being jiggy. That's what we're talking about. Yeah, it's simple as that. Netflix and chill. So that's a little bit of humor because I want to try and get people to realize that they're thinking about when I ask them to think about sex and gender, they actually start to think in terms of sex versus gender as the two things. What would you put on the form? Would you put sex? Would you put gender? This misses the fact that when we talk about sex, we tend to be thinking about sexual. Most of the problems for LGBT people, because everybody is obsessed with sexual activity. So the moment you say homosexual, everybody's thinking about sexual activity. Transsexual, people are thinking, have you had it cut off? That's the kind of issue. So can you see what I'm doing? I'm using these slides with a little bit of humor. I draw them into a conversation and then we start talking about some issues around that. And I might very well just, blank out the slides completely and have the conversation. You can always blank out. Oops, no, you can't do it on here. If I'm projecting onto a screen, I can hit black and it just blanks it out. Here, it's very easy. All I have to do is hit that and we're back here and the slides are gone and I can carry on having a conversation without the slides. So, we have the tools available. Now it's sometimes not quite as slick as I'd like it to be. TV studio doing all this here. I'm doing it all by myself. So let's go back to those slides again just for a second and just see where we go next. So I do use text slides. So when we get into looking at the actual discussion of what is sex and what is gender, then I'm going to bring it up. Sex is about reproductive systems, about chromosomes, hormones, and gametes. Yeah, and we'll talk all about this. And then I'll talk about intersex and the people who are born not one or the other, somewhere in between with a physical body. So we start to learn that sex isn't an absolute. Everybody has estrogen. Everybody has testosterone. So having quite a list with these bullets up isn't creating a problem. I'm talking through them all. People can see it. I want them to think about those words, those terms, and see that actually it isn't quite as clean as we might. Gender's about all those things other than the body. It's about language, culture, the kind of education we get, the roles we're expected to play in life, the kind of jobs we'll have, what we wear, our appearance, our behavior. People's expectations are different depending on whether it's a boy or a girl. In fact, our entire place in society is determined very often by our gender. So we can actually start to look, and I can expand on this and we can explore it in some detail, or I can keep it fairly tight depending upon what the audience. Now, my next stage is to move on to some graphical presentation of this. And so I use the genderbread person. It's a diagram that's been around a lot. And I can now talk about sex. Part of our gender is determined by our sex. Part about who we're romantically or physically attracted to. Part is about what's in our head. And I talk there about the problems of growing up and the fact hardwired sometimes in a way that doesn't fit with our physical body. That's, I think, what happened to me. But you don't see any of that. What you see is my gender expression. How do I express myself? And we make all sorts of assumptions that if I appear to be male, but I dress in a way that you would expect of a female, immediately all sorts of assumptions about my sexuality, about things I may or may not have done to my body. Everybody starts to make all sorts of assumptions and jump to conclusions about what me not conforming to the gender binary means. Instead of just accepting it, actually, I just happen to be a person who likes to express myself in a different way. And there are quite a few of us. And we can look then, and I use these bar charts to try and help. And again, you can start to be very, very clever. You've got masculinity and femininity. And at the extreme, you masculinity with no femininity. And we don't tend to like that, do we? It's a bit narcissistic. It's the old sort of Arnie Schwarzenegger, Sly Stallone, the workout at the gym. It's the person who's more obsessed with themselves than they are with relationships. So everybody prefers men with a little bit of femininity. Everybody wants their man to be a little gay, just a little bit. And it's all about these balances. And you can move these around. These sliders can move in any way you want. There's infinite possibilities of the extent of masculinity and femininity. Now, I also, within my talk a little bit about some of the legal aspects, and in particular the way in which we're treated. So remember, the goal of my presentation is to try to help create a fairer society, help create an environment in an office where trans and gender non-binary people are more included. I do a full presentation about the Equality Act. Sometimes if I'm doing a longer presentation, I might, but I like to remind people just about what those protected characteristics are. And we need to know that these are the factors. And I do a discussion about that. I'm not going to do that now because I do talk a lot about harassment, because this is the big problem. This is what we've got to try and stop. People being harassed just because they're different. And harassment in this country occurs when someone engages in unwanted behavior which is related to a relevant protected characteristic. Do you see why I needed that chart with all those protected characteristics? I wasn't going to talk about them all. I talk about a couple of them. But I need that to remind people what the protected characteristics are. And they will have got that. And it's just a reminder, because everybody's had 10 years now we've had this. People have had a reminder. So it's not overload to give that list. And maybe you want to not had that training. Would hope they had. And which has the purpose or effect of violating a person's dignity or creating an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for that person. That is a very tough definition. You tell a joke in the office which is a bit, negative towards people who are gay or people who are black or people who are Muslim or people who are disabled. You don't know, just because everybody looks as if they're not gay or not disabled or not part of the discriminated group. You don't know if they're not married to someone who is, or have a son or daughter who is, or parents who are. You never know in any conversation who you're affecting. So I want to try and get people to understand that harassment can occur even when if there was a hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment for the person. It's that person saying that, that was unwanted. What you did made me feel really, really bad, really, really uncomfortable and not wanting to be here. And that is harassment. That's the message I need to get across. Biggest way to harass trans people? Use the wrong pronouns. Someone who's changed gender from male to female, call them him. That's harassment. If you keep on doing it, making occasional mistakes, one thing, but doing it purposely, that's harassment. Dead naming, using someone's old name because you knew what they used to be called, that's harassment. So that's really the message I'm trying to get to people to understand. What is it? And there are other things that I will bring up and talk about. And I will use slides to bring those up because I want to reinforce the point. I want to make it clear that people can see it. Now, here's one. There are so many labels now. Oh my God, look at this. We could be female, cisgender, female. You could be gender non-conforming, gender questioning, gender variant, intersex. These are all labels that you could have. And if you can't find one there, well, don't worry, there are more. You can be neutre, trans person, trans third gender. Yeah, and there's more. Look at this, trans feminine, trans masculine. Thing is, There are still more. We've got no drag queens, female impersonators, shemale, ladyboy, and Travis Albanian swarm virgins. They haven't included those on the list. I can't even pronounce most of these. They're mostly in the Pacific and Africa, Indonesia. It's a little bit of fun. There's lots and lots. I don't expect everybody to read everything on that. I don't want them to read everything on that slide. What the purpose of that slide, even with huge amounts of numbers, is just to show 100 labels for everybody's different genders. Who wants that? How many genders are there? Well, take your pick. Why don't we all have our own? We could. Kate Borstein talks about that. So can you see that we've got a huge amount of stuff here? Now, I've showed this because there are all sorts of things you can do with PowerPoint slides. I show this not because I want everybody to read this. There's no way they're going to read that. But at this point, I'm talking about LGBT history, and you can get this poster, and it's a big poster from around. The great thing about PowerPoint is it has a few nice little features, so I can scroll the entire poster. Look, why don't you have that up on your wall so that people can wander up and have a look at the people in the LGBT community over the past 50 years or so, 100 years, who have impacted the LGBT, who are part of LGBT history. Yeah. That you can get hold of. So, now, I haven't finished my presentation at this point, and I bring in questions and answers because I like to have a Q&A session before I finish. And the reason for that is that if you have Q&A at the end of your presentation, you have no idea and no control over the last message that people are going to get at the end of your presentation. It might be a really negative comment. It might be a really difficult question that you can't answer. It might be, and just let's face it, I mean, I'm doing stuff about transgender. There has been an enormous amount of negative backlash against trans people as a result of the government consultations and issues going on about, whether kids should be allowed to have treatment, etc. And I don't want one of those questions coming up at the end. But then I go to my last one. This is the main message. Treat everyone with dignity and respect. How do you feel about that? I will ask a question. Hands up, how many of you are comfortable with the idea of treat everyone with dignity and respect? This is the mantra for equality and diversity across the world. This is the United Nations mantra for the Human Rights Act, or certainly Human Rights Agenda, Human Rights Charter. How many of you are comfortable with that? Really? Everyone. Murderers, paedophiles, sex offenders, rapists, everyone, terrorists. Treat everyone with dignity and respect. Now, I can tell you this, what happens is that people say, yeah, until I give that list of some of the awful people. And this is the point I want to try and make. You cannot treat everyone except these with dignity and respect. It doesn't work, because the moment you do that, you become no better than the people you are criticizing and saying, no, they can't have human rights. And we keep getting it. People wanting to bring in some kind of rule that says human rights law doesn't apply to certain people. Who gets to choose? Who decides who doesn't get it? Who decides who can be arrested and not be given dignity and respect, not be given their human rights? Very difficult. And at this stage, I tell a story about a personal experience of hate crime for me, where had I acted inappropriately, I would quite clearly have been in the wrong. Whereas by acting appropriately, and trust me, I was at the point where I may have easily gone wrong. So there we are. That's the whole area that we're talking. There we are. We're back. And I'm going to pretty much leave it there. Don't forget that I'm here tomorrow. I'm going to be carrying on this. I'm looking at inviting a few people to speak next week so I can get some actual, have a chat to some speakers. If you need some speaker coaching, I'm regularly coaching people now. Just drop me a line at ricky@rickyarundel.com and arrange a 30-minute introductory session. I'll talk you through how I can help you. Best thing is if you've got a presentation coming up and you need some help with it, that's how I'm best able to help. Just general stuff I would generally recommend if you just want to generally improve your speaking skills in over the next year. Join a Toastmasters or Association Speakers Club. But if you need to get on top of a great presentation, if you want to get up there and do a good presentation, standing speaker, talk to me. I can help you do that. Let's have a 30-minute introductory session. Hope you enjoyed tonight. Hope that's been helpful. I shall be back tomorrow where we'll be carrying on looking a little bit more at the presentation tools. Look forward to that. Take care. Have a night.